Good afternoon, members and friends of Calvary. Time for your video devotion of the week. Today's devotion actually kind of picks up or shows the other side from last night's sermon. Last night we looked in the book of Jeremiah in chapter 44 of how people refused to submit to God and their stubbornness, and how stubbornness affects our homes, it affects our marriages, it affects our lives, and mainly it affects our relationships with the Lord. And today we look at the opposite, and the opposite of stubbornness would be humility. And the title this morning would be The Power of Humility. So when we think of Bible characters, there are a few people that we would think of that might be worse than Ahab and Jezebel, two people whose ministries or lives and their choices are just in complete polar opposite to God and in opposition to God. And yet in 1 Kings chapter 21, Elijah comes and presents a message to Ahab. And in verse number 27, the Bible says this, "And it came to pass when Ahab heard those words, that he rent his clothes and put on sackcloth upon his flesh and fasted and lay in sackcloth and went softly. And the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite, saying, Seest thou how Ahab humbleth himself before me? Because he humbleth himself before me, I will not bring this evil in his days, but in his son's days will I bring the evil upon this house." And so Ahab spared he and his wife immediate judgment. He spared his nation judgment. He spared himself judgment simply by humbling himself before God. Humble and humility and coming to God and saying, I can't, you can, forgive me, you're right, I'm wrong. And God is then gracious, and God is then powerful, and God then intercedes on his behalf. And so our challenge today is just that, the power of humility. It might be today that humbleness on your part, humbleness on my part, might fix and change what nothing else will. Humbleness to our kids might change them when rules and discipline and everything else hasn't. Humbleness in our marriage might fix it when nothing else has. Humbleness might help us to be a better witness and a testimony, more so than all of the soul winning classes in all the world. And so today, let's look at the power of humility, at going before God and saying, you're big, I'm small, you're right, I'm wrong, please help me, and see what God can do. The power of humility.